Hello there and welcome to VGC, I'm Chris Scullion. The Capcom Arcade Second Stadium comes out on the 22nd of July and we've been playing it for review purposes. It's a sequel to Capcom Arcade Stadium, and like that it's got a bunch of classic Capcom Arcade games in it, 32 of them to be exact. But a lot of them aren't household names this time, so a lot of players may not be too familiar with them as much as the games in the first compilation. So with that in mind, we decided to put this video together where I'll explain to you every game in the compilation, all 32 of them, so you can see what's on offer, see them all in action in the actual game itself, and maybe learn a thing or two about the games you may not be too familiar with. Now, the game presents them in chronological order, so I thought it would make sense to do the same in this video. So we'll start with the earliest game, which is a 1984 release, and we'll go all the way up to the most kind of modern one. So let's get cracking. So first up is the oldest game in the compilation, which is Sun, which was released in 1984, and it's convenient that this is the first one because this is the only game that is included free as part of Capcom Arcade Second Stadium. So even if you don't want to buy the rest of the games, you'll get Sun for hee-haw, which around our way means nothing. Yeah, so this is a kind of mid-80s game. It's a pretty basic side-scroller. You play as a wee monkey guy called Sun, who's trying to make his way to a big statue of Buddha, but for some reason there's a lot of enemies trying to stop him from getting there. So you just jump up and down the platforms, firing at the enemies as they come near you. It's basic, but it's fun enough. Following that is Savage Bees. This was the North American name for XXs, which is the title it's most commonly known as these days. There isn't a hell of a lot to this one because again it's another fairly early Capcom arcade game. It's just a pretty straightforward vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. You fly upwards and take out enemies, job done. It does have some really good parallax scrolling for its day, you know, like when different parts of the background scroll at different speeds. And like with most games in this compilation, there's now the option to turn on auto fire if you want, which makes it a lot more enjoyable. You're not just battering the button over and over again. So it's fine, it's decent. Next up is Gunsmoke. Now, this is a weird one because this was 100% released in arcades in the West. I remember playing it myself. So it's not really clear why the Western version of the game here still has Japanese text. The vast majority of the games here let you choose between Western and Japanese versions of the game. But even when you choose the Western version of Gunsmoke, it's still got the Japanese title screen. So I'm not really sure if that's a bug that will be patched by launch, or whether there's been kind of newfound licensing issues. I know there was an old TV show that was called Gunsmoke, so I suppose we'll need to wait and see. But either way, it's still a good game. It's another vertical shooter, but this time instead of it being like a spaceship or something, you're a cowboy, and you can shoot either straight ahead or to diagonals. It's really fun. Every now and then you can jump on a horse, and it's a fun take on a fairly common genre, the vertical shoot 'em up. Next up is the Speed Rumbler. This one was known as Russian Crash in Japan. This one's set in the 21st century, and you're a special forces soldier whose wife and kids have been kidnapped by the bad guys along with everyone else in your village apparently. So you have to head out and get them back. It's another kind of top-down action game where you start off in a car, like an armoured car, but after a while, if it takes enough damage, it'll start flaming like in a Grand Theft Auto game, and you've got time to jump out before it blows up. And then for that period you're on foot and you have to survive gunning down enemies until you come across, until your next car spawns, and then you can jump in that and carry on. So it's decent. It's a decent little game that was kind of unique for its time. Following that is Sidearms Hyperdyne. It's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up where you've got to take on an evil alien race called Boson. Bad guys, let me tell you. The main gimmick here is that you're in this big flying robot thing, or a mobile suit as they call it here. Gundam style, and the main gimmick is that you can shoot to either the left or the right, but with different buttons. There's a button that shoots left and a button that shoots right, which basically means instead of just firing straight forward, you need to keep an eye out for enemies approaching from either side. Next up is Hisatsu Buriken. This is another one like Gunsmoke. It doesn't appear to have its Western version, though in this version, in this case, it doesn't even pretend to have it. Although Gunsmoke lets you still choose between a Western and Japanese version, it don't seem to be different. Here, it just says there is no Western version available. It's only the Japanese one, so you don't have a choice. In the West, you might know it as Avenger or sometimes Avengers. So again, it's not clear if this is to avoid a copyright clash with now that the Marvel's Avengers is a lot more popular, or whether it's just a mistake for now and the Western version will be added in a patch later on. This one was created by Takashi Nishiyama and Hiroshi Matsumoto, who worked together on the first Street Fighter game later on that year, and the hero's called Ryu, so you can do the maths. It's fun enough top-down beat-em-up thing. It's nothing crazy, but it's worth a play. Then it's Black Tiger. This is a cool wee side-scrolling action platformer where you play as the Black Tiger and basically just make your way through destroying everyone. It's got a bit of a Ghouls and Ghosts, Ghosts and Goblins feel to it, but it's quite a lot faster though. This one's a good example of why it's nice to have the Western and Japanese versions of most of the games available in the compilation, because the Japanese version is quite a bit harder than the Western one, so there's a notable difference between the two versions in this one. After Black Tiger is Street Fighter, the original Street Fighter. There's a reason why Street Fighter 2 is the one that kind of changed the world, because Street Fighter really shows its age now. It's a really clunky fighting game. It's obviously iconic because without it we would never have had the one-on-one fighting genre would maybe never have even taken off like it did. But certainly of the 32 games in this compilation, the original Street Fighter is one of the worst because it just doesn't hold up. It's really clunky. So it's nice to have it there for posterity's sake because it wasn't in the original Capcom Arcade Stadium, but yeah, you're not going to be playing this one much. After Street Fighter is Tiger Road. It's a wee side-scrolling action game where you play as a chap called Lee Wong, who's got to rescue the village's children from the evil Ryuken, because apparently Capcom just love games where like a village's worth of children have been kidnapped. There's a nice variety in the stages in this one. They aren't all side-scrolling, even though it's like a side-scrolling action game. Sometimes there's some verticality, like there's a level where you have to jump your way up platforms in a waterfall. And it's just got a great feel some of the old arcade games did, where you can kill enemies with like a single hit and the game just throws hundreds of them at you at a time, and then you get to just mow through them. So it's fun stuff. Then there's 1943 Kai. Now the first Capcom Arcade Stadium came with 1943 as its free game, and players had to buy the rest of the game, so the 1943 was the son of the first bundle. And included among the paid games were something like 3 or 4 other 19 games in the 1940X series. The only one it didn't include was 1943 Kai, which is a sort of remake of 1943, albeit one that was only released like a year later, so you would think not that much of a remake. But in reality it's got much better graphics and sound than the first 1943, and it was only ever released in arcades in Japan, so it's been in other Capcom retro compilations. It's not difficult to find it, but it's nice to have another way to kind of officially get hold of it. Then it's Last Duel, which this one takes place in the future, the distant year 2012 to be exact. And it's a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up with a wee bit of a twist. Half of the levels have you driving like an armed car, which you can accelerate and decelerate. It's kind of like something like Spy Hunter, if you remember that. But then the other levels jump you into a spaceship instead, and it makes it more like a standard vertical shoot 'em up. So there's a bit of a variety here. It's fine. It's nothing to write home about, but it's okay. Then it's Rally 2011 LED Storm. Now this might actually be the most interesting inclusion in the whole collection, more because it's actually a really rare version of the game, rather than the one most people, anyone who remembers LED Storm will know it. So Rally 2011 was the very first version of it, and it was tested in a few locations, as most arcade games are, and it was then taken back and Capcom made a load of changes to it before re-releasing it as just LED Storm, and in Japan they called it Mad Gear. So this is the kind of the test version basically, and there's a load of differences in it. Your car can transform into a motorbike, which it couldn't in the later version. The later version let you choose between 3 different vehicles. This one doesn't, and this one's got a load of speech all the way through it, like speech samples, which were removed for the kind of final version. The game itself's fun enough. It's a top-down action racer. You take out baddies by jumping into the air and landing on them. But to be honest, I think the story of the game is probably more interesting than the game itself, but it's a curious one and a fun one to have. Next up is Magic Sword. Now, this one's similar in a way to Tiger Road, which we spoke about earlier, in that you play as a single hero, this time a swordsman with the extremely heroic name of Alan. And Alan has to slash his way through loads of baddies. The main gimmick this time is that you can be joined along the way. You can come across allies who'll join you for a wee while. There's like an Amazon warrior woman, there's a ninja, a thief, a priest, and someone in the game just calls it a big man. So there's 8 of these in total, and when you find one they tag along as like an AI partner for a while, almost as if you're playing co-op with them. It's a strong game. If you've never played it you might be pleasantly surprised by it. It's one of the better ones on here. Up next is Three Wonders. Now this was allegedly only available if you pre-ordered Capcom Fighting Collection, but at the time of us recording this video, Steam is letting you pre-order a bundle which includes Capcom Arcade Second Stadium and Three Wonders, so maybe there'll still be a way to get it even if you don't get Fighting Collection. Three Wonders is actually 3 games in one. It opens with a game selection screen and you choose the one you want. So there's Midnight Wanderers, which is an action platformer, there's Chariot, which is like a shoot 'em up, and then there's Don't Pull, which is a puzzle game with a rabbit in it. Neither of them are particularly stunning, but they aren't stinkers either, so it's a decent enough trio, and it kind of bumps up the number of games. So although technically it's 32 games, if you count this as 3 it's actually 34. After Three Wonders is The King of Dragons. A lot of people associate Capcom's arcade output of the kind of 90s with side-scrolling beat-em-ups, stuff like Final Fight and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs and that, but there aren't actually many of them in this bundle, in this compilation. The King of Dragons is one of them, and it's interesting because it lets you choose between 5 different characters and they can all level up as you defeat enemies, so it gives the game a wee bit more depth. Instead of just ploughing through baddies from start to finish, you're actually building your character. It is worth noting that this is already part of the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, which was released in 2018. So if you're only really interested in beat 'em ups and this one looks good to you, you might want to hunt that down instead because it's probably a bit cheaper by now. Then there's Block, which is a pretty basic Breakout and Arkanoid clone. This one was released in 91, and for a game released in 1991 you'd have probably expected a bit more than this. But there you go, it's a bat and ball game, and that's about it. The original arcade game had a dial you would turn to move the bat to give you a kind of degree of analog control over the speed, but here you can move the left stick instead, so you still get that kind of analog control, which is good. You can use a D-pad if you want, but you can get analog control if you prefer. Next up is Knights of the Round, which is like the King of the Dragons. This was also included in the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle, and it's probably a better game. It's a kind of spiritual successor to King of the Dragons because it's still got a fantasy setting and you still level up your characters. But what it also is the closest Capcom ever got, I think, to Golden Axe, because it's just uncanny at times. You even get to jump on horses like in Golden Axe when you jump on the dinosaurs. It's really similar. But it's really good. It's one of the better ones on here that isn't a Street Fighter game, basically. Not counting Street Fighter 1. Then it's Saturday Night Slam Masters. This is a really cool one. I really enjoyed this one back in the day. It's a cross between a wrestling game and a one-on-one fighting game. There are 8 wrestlers to choose from, including Mike Hager, actually, from Final Fight. Final Fight was released a number of years earlier, and the story went that Mike Hager was a former wrestler turned mayor of Metro City, so Saturday Night Slam Masters lets you see Mike Hager doing what he does best as a wrestler. So there's 8 to choose from, and they're all your typical wrestling gimmicks and stuff, and it's cool. It's obviously a lot more action focused than a normal wrestling game would be. There's hardly any grapples in it. It's mostly strike attacks, because it's still essentially a fighting game at its core. But it's fun enough. It's basic and there's not a lot to it, but it's fun. Next up is Eco Fighters. This is a side-scrolling shoot 'em up with an environmental theme, which I suppose is even more relevant now than it was 25 years ago. It's got an interesting gimmick in that your main gun is a metallic arm that extends out from the ship, and you can then rotate the arm, which lets you fire in all directions. So this is handled quite well in Arcade Second Stadium because you rotate the arm with the L1 and R1 buttons, or the left and right bumpers if you're using the Xbox, making it easy for you to unleash your inner Greta Thunberg and save the environment, although in a more kind of violent way. Then there's Pinkies, or Nickies, I suppose you could call it. Don't know if the P's silent. It feels like there's a million puzzle games that play quite a bit like Puyo Puyo, and this is, of all those games, this is one of them. The main difference here is that you can join as many of the coloured blobs together as you like, but they'll only disappear when 2 of those blobs have stars on them. Other than that, though, it's a pretty straightforward puzzler. You're probably not going to remember this one when you're rhyming them off, especially because it's so difficult to pronounce. I still don't know if it's Pinkies or Nickies, but we'll find out. At this point we kind of get quite heavily into the one-on-one fighting game area of the compilation, because by this point a lot of Capcom's best fighting games were in the first Arcade Stadium, so now for the second Arcade Stadium we're getting into the others. And this is also the point where people who bought Capcom Fighting Collection just last month, will start thinking, hold on a minute. So first up is Darkstalkers The Night Warriors, which was included in Capcom Fighting Collection. Now it included 10 games, and as you're about to discover, 6 of those games are in this. So if you just bought Capcom Fighting Collection, you might be a bit annoyed that more than half of it is in this 32 game compilation as well, so you might as well have saved your money potentially. So if you missed the last video, Darkstalkers is a fighting series. It's similar to Street Fighter, but it's got more of a horror theme, so instead of picking World Warriors, you're picking from a bunch of monsters instead. It was one of the first kind of Capcom CPS2 arcade games. It was a kind of advanced arcade board, so it looks better than Street Fighter 2. The sprites are more detailed, and everyone looks really impressive for its time, and it was a great start to like the Darkstalkers series. After that is Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge, which is technically Darkstalkers 2, which was also in Capcom Fighting Collection. It's more like an enhanced update. It adds the boss fighters from the first game and a couple of new characters. There's like a Chinese vampire and there's like a male vampire. There's lots of vampires in it. Other than the new characters, it plays a lot like the first Darkstalkers. You can turn on auto blocking, but that's really it's more a kind of champion edition of the first game. Then there's Street Fighter Alpha, for those not around back in the day. This one really took everyone by surprise at the time, because after something like 5 different versions of Street Fighter 2, everyone was saying, right, Capcom, come on, where's Street Fighter 3 now? And instead of Street Fighter 3, they gave us this, a prequel of essentially Street Fighter 0, which is what it's called in Japan. It's set between the events of Street Fighter and Street Fighter 2, and it's got younger versions of the kind of regular, like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Bison and Sagat, and then it brings back some like Birdie and Adon from the original Street Fighter and making them playable for the first time. And then it threw in some new characters, like it put in Guy from Final Fight and Sodom from Final Fight. It added a bunch of new gameplay mechanics, like a new super combo system which splits the power gauge into 3 different levels, and added air blocking and chain combos and stuff like that. It was a really good reboot for the series, and though it wasn't the Street Fighter 3 that everyone wanted, its presence here is really welcome. Following on from Street Fighter Alpha, there's Mega Man The Power Battle. In the entire 35-year history of Mega Man, there's only ever been 2 arcade games, this one and its sequel. The Power Battle's interesting because it plays like a shortened version of a traditional Mega Man game, so whereas those games had like a platforming stage that then leads into a boss fight, this one just jumps straight to the boss fights. So as in the main games, you'd beat a boss, then you get their weapon, and you can then toggle between the weapons during the fight to take out other bosses, and some weapons are more powerful against certain bosses, etc. So there's 3 stories to choose from here, which just basically means you get to take on different bosses from Mega Man 1 and 2, 3 to 6 and Mega Man 7. So it essentially means you'll need to do 3 playthroughs before you've completely beaten it. It's a cool wee mix of Mega Man and like a one-on-one fighting game. It's worth a look. After that we jump back to Street Fighter with Street Fighter Alpha 2. Capcom just loved making things confusing for people, so Street Fighter Alpha 2, basically a sequel to a prequel. It brought back Zangief and Dalsim from Street Fighter 2 and added a few new characters again, like Sakura, the Japanese schoolgirl who would become a fan favourite, can't think why. But the Bison and Akuma and Dan were bosses they were hidden in the first Street Fighter Alpha, and they were kind of made fully playable here. And they added a new custom combo thing where you could put your own combos together, so it was a nice wee improvement on the first Street Fighter Alpha. Then comes Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, which is a puzzle game where you choose from a selection of Street Fighter and Darkstalkers characters. It's another Puyo Puyo type thing, although it's not exactly like Puyo Puyo, to be fair. There's elements where you have to form squares and stuff like that. You basically drop gems into a well and try to form the squares with them, and then you trigger them with gems to make them all disappear. If you position the gems in a certain way so that they drop to create chain reactions, you can create big combos which send a lot of kind of debris and kind of junk gems to your opponent's screen. And meanwhile you've got little chibi Street Fighter characters who fight each other in the middle of the screen while you play. It's fine. It's not my cup of tea, but some people kind of swear by it, so fair play to them. Then there's Mega Man 2 The Power Fighters, which is the other of the 2 Mega Man arcade games. It's another arcade fighting game. It plays a lot again like the boss battles in Mega Man games. It's pretty much more of the same as the first Mega Man arcade game. The first one let you choose between Mega Man, Proto Man and Bass, and the sequel adds Duel as like a 4th playable character. Other than that, it's just another series of fights against another variety of Mega Man Robot Masters, but if it isn't broke, why fix it, I suppose. Either way, it's nice to have both the arcade Mega Man titles in the same collection, which is a nice touch. Up next is Vampire Saviour, the Lord of Vampire, which was the third Darkstalkers game, and once again this is in Capcom Fighting Collection last month. This one ditches the bosses from the first game, as well as one of the kind of vampire characters, and they add new characters, 4 new characters, including BB Hood, who is basically my favourite character in the entire Darkstalkers series, because she's like a little Red Riding Hood spoof who's got a big massive machine gun and kind of drops landmines. There's like Jeddah, who's like a humanoid demon thing. There's a QB, who's like a weird bee human hybrid thing. And Morrigan gets a clone called Lilith. This is kind of basic stuff. The only other real change to this one is the round system. Instead of like best of three rounds where you empty someone's energy bar and then the fight stops and you start over again, this is more like Killer Instinct, where when someone's energy bar drops it instantly refills. It's basically one big long round and you get 2 life bars, so that's the only major difference. But again, you get 3 Darkstalkers games in this compilation, which is fine, but like I say earlier, people who had Capcom Fighting Collection may be a little annoyed that a lot of the stuff in that game is carried over here. One game that wasn't in the Fighting Collection is Capcom Sports Club, which is a really nice surprise because it's a game that's not often discussed, but it's genuinely entertaining. It's one of the true kind of hidden gems of this compilation, really. It's actually a compilation in its own right. It consists of 3 different sports games. There's a tennis game called Smash Stars, a football game called Kick Stars, and a basketball game called Dunk Stars. Each game is just as fully featured as other arcade versions of these sports, so each one's got a tournament mode and a load of different characters or teams to choose from. And all 3 of them are fun to play, and they've all got competitive 2-player modes, so it could end up being the title with the longest legs. If you plan on playing this a lot with a friend locally, Capcom Sports Club is one you could end up playing more. And also, technically it's 3 games in one, so if you go back to 3 Wonders, which was 3 games in one as well, you suddenly realise that the so-called 32 games in this package is actually more like 36 now, so it's becoming more value for money as you go along. Nearly at the end, don't worry. Up next is Super Gem Fighter Mini Mix, which is basically if you like the chibi art style of Super Puzzle Fighter but would actually rather play a fighting game, that's this. It's a really cool, I love this one. It's a kind of cute fighting game with a really simplified control scheme. There's a punch and a kick, a throw button and a taunt button and a special button, and that's pretty much it. And because it's a more kind of cartoon style game, there's loads of funny animations, like your fighters morph into other characters and other things, like Chun-Li morphs into Jill Valentine for one move and fires a bazooka and everything. So it's not complex, it's a really basic fighting game. So it's not like it's going to be seen at the evil fighting competition anytime soon, but in terms of just having a casual punch about with pals, it's one of the most entertaining ones in the compilation. Then comes Street Fighter Alpha 3. By the time this came out, Street Fighter 3 had already been out for a year and a half, so Capcom just thought, well, let's confuse everyone one more time and go back to make another Alpha. There's a good job it did, because Alpha 3 is easily the best of the 3 Alpha games. It adds like another 10 characters. And this new isms feature where you can choose between 3 different playing styles. So there's A-ism, which keeps the kind of 3-stage combo meter that's in the Alpha games. There's X-ism, which gives you like a single one, like in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And then there's V-isms, which let you do the custom combos from Alpha 2. And then also whichever ism you pick changes your character's speed and strength and defense stats, so the tactics involved here are a bit ridiculous, so it's worth a look. And then finally, there's Hyper Street Fighter 2, the Anniversary Edition, which is another really interesting one that was added to, you guessed it, the Fighting Collection last month, and they've carried it over. It's like waiting for buses. It was like a good 15, 20 years since we last had Hyper Street Fighter 2, and then suddenly it's been re-released twice in a month. It's basically a definitive version of Street Fighter 2. It not only includes every character, but every version of them. From Street Fighter 2, Champion Edition, Hyper Fighting, Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. So you can have like the Championship Edition version of E Honda fighting against the Super Street Fighter 2 version of Fei Long, for example. It's a pretty niche concept, because there can't be a hell of a lot of people who think, oh well, actually I prefer original Street Fighter 2 Ken because his Dragon Punch didn't catch fire, etc. But if nothing else, it's great to see this version of the game again, even though we just saw it a month ago. It is kind of one of the more definitive versions of it. But that's it. That is Capcom Arcade Second Stadium. That's all 32 games, or 36 if you were keeping count of the multi-game ones. Hopefully that was informative. Hopefully that taught you a bit more about some of the games you may have been less familiar with. And like I say, the full compilation is out on the 22nd of July. And please do jump on VGC, videogameschronicle.com for more gaming goodness if you like the cut of our jib and want to see more. Until then, please do the usual like and subscribe and stuff you would expect on YouTube. You know the drill. You know how it goes. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you all later. Thank you. Bye bye.